Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. I'm here with our fellow seekers and my teacher and good friend Chaitanya Charan, who is in India, and we call him the spiritual scientist. He is like, if anybody can dissect the Gita and put it back together in a way that just completely relates and resonates with you in a very systematic, clear, logical. It's Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. So I am so excited to have him here today. And I joke with everybody, it's not really a joke, it's actually real, that when I give class or really anything, I'm stealing most of my material from Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. So it's so nice to have him here with us to present and for everyone to get a flavor. So thank you for being here, Chaitanya Charan.
Delighted to be here, all of you. Grateful to be of some service. So as I said, it's wonderful that you are continuing this podcast. Gita is a favorite book of mine. I think it is also a book that you relish.
Yeah, thanks to you. You know, actually, when I first started working with Chaitanya Charan Prabhu and I talked to you on the phone, I remember you asked me like what my inclination was, like what I was attracted to in bhakti. And at that time I said chanting, but I think I told you this at the time, that I was really looking forward to working with you because I was hoping that some of your passion and connection for the Gita would rub off on me. And I feel that happening now. So I'm getting my wish. So I'm grateful.
Right. Happy to be of service. Yes. So
Yeah.
how do you want to go ahead to it?
So Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is going to present the chapter 1 summary today. We in our episodes, I think this is episode 11, we finished chapter 1. We just started chapter 2 on Thursday. So we're just going to go back a bit, and Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is going to present just chapter 1 summary. So just kind of going through it, giving people a way to remember things and maybe pointing out some key points or things that you think are relevant and interesting. Yeah, we would just like to hear anything that you have to say.
Thank you. So let's pray to Krishna and to the Gita that they provide us the wisdom by which we can mold our life and come closer to them. So the first chapter of the Gita is different in both tone and content from the remaining Gita. Most of the Gita is an analytical, elaborate discussion of philosophical concepts. But the first chapter is more descriptive of the setting, and so descriptive of the situation and descriptive of the emotion. The emotions also come throughout the Gita, but they are much more subtle and nuanced later on. Here, they are much more pronounced. So the first chapter, I'll talk about two major divisions, and then we'll go into subdivisions of the Gita. That among the 18 chapters, whenever any book begins, often authors have to have a hook to draw the people in. So quite often there are books written about how to write the first sentence of a book. That's supposed to be a hook. The first sentence, the first paragraph, the first page, the first chapter, that determines whether people will go further inside it or not. So even from a literary perspective, the first chapter in any book is important. Now, sometimes the hook can be deceptive in the sense that the hook can be a representation of bait and switch. That you give one thing in the beginning and then give something entirely different. Say, if there's a movie trailer which shows that, oh, this is a rom-com, it's a romantic comedy, and then the actual movie turns out to be a horror movie. That's misrepresenting. So the Gita's first chapter as I said, in tone and content, it is different. And yet, it seamlessly leads to the Gita. It's not bait and switch. The reason for that is the Gita is showing philosophy. If you can say, the philosophy is a little rarefied domain. Not everybody feels the need for philosophy. So it shows the need for philosophy from a very humanly relatable perspective. And that humanly relatable perspective is what is described in the first chapter. And in that way, the transition to deep philosophy is seamless. Now, the word philosophy itself is complex, and sometimes there's a lot of philosophy about how to define philosophy. But I have a very simple operational understanding of what philosophy is. People need philosophy, or people turn to philosophy when they want to make sense of things that don't make sense. When you want to make sense of things that don't make sense. So the first chapter is outlining the situation by which why things don't make sense are described. And then after that description is given, things just don't make sense. Then the turning toward philosophy, an attempt to make sense of that which does not make sense, makes sense at that. That attempt becomes relevant. That attempt becomes important at that particular time. So that's the overall context of why the battlefield is so vividly described in the first chapter of the Gita, when subsequently the battlefield setting is hardly mentioned thereafter. So any comments on this, or should I go ahead, or how do you want to do this?
No, yeah, I may have comments throughout, but right now I don't. So yeah, continue.
Okay.
That makes sense to me, what you just said.
That's a good one. Now, the Gita itself is a book that can be understood in many different levels. So the outer conversation in the Gita is between a blind king, Dhritarashtra, and Sanjay. And they are describing what happens on the battlefield. So the Gita's first chapter has 46 verses, and it is generally divided into two sections. The first section is 26 verses, and the second is 20 verses. And the Gita traditionally is named according to either one or the second of the sections. So the Gita is a part of the Mahabharata, and the Mahabharata itself has chapter divisions, but it does not have chapter names. So the two sections are observing the armies on the battlefield and Arjuna's lamentation. So correspondingly, this chapter has two names. Arjuna Vishada Yoga, which is Arjuna's lamentation, that's the Sanskrit word for it, or Sainya Niriksha Yoga, observing the battlefields. So Srila Prabhupada in his Bhagavad Gita uses observing the battlefield. And if we look at it from a thematic perspective, the theme of the first chapter is blindness. And from blindness, one goes to having eyes. From darkness, one goes toward light. And there are three characters who broadly speak in this chapter, and they all have different degrees of blindness. So the first character, of course, is Dhritarashtra. The second character whose speech is described in the Bhagavad Gita is Duryodhana. And the third character is Arjuna. The Sanjay is the narrator, and Krishna barely speaks in this chapter. So we'll not go into those two characters right now. Now, Dhritarashtra's blindness is not just physical, it is also emotional. It is actually much more, not just emotional, it's metaphysical also. That he is blindly supporting his own son when that son is against virtue, against common sense, against even basic survival instinct. So the Gita begins with Dhritarashtra's question. What did they do on the battlefield? What happened? That's the question. And that question indicates his tension between hope and despair. Hope that somehow his side will be victorious, and despair that because of being on the side of wise, because of various other factors, his son and his sons, in fact, they are doomed. So now blindness can be from two broad ways. It is one is inability to see, the other is unwillingness to see. So the Gita is not talking about Dhritarashtra's inability to see. That is there, of course. He is a blind king. But when I'm talking about three levels of blindness, it is the unwillingness to see. That is what is the focus. So he is unwilling to see the inevitable consequences of the vicious actions of his sons and of his own culpable silence while they were doing those vicious actions. So that is the starting. What did they do? Now, knowing that Dhritarashtra's primary concern is for his son's well-being. So, although the question, Kim Akurvata, what did they do? Sanjay starts the answer by focusing on the person about whom Dhritarashtra is most concerned. That is his own son Duryodhana. So there are two sides in the army, and they are at a significantly separated distance from each other because the war has not yet started. And so initially, we could say the narrative camera is focused on the side of Duryodhana. Then it will shift to the side of Arjuna, and that's where it will stay throughout. Of course, Arjuna himself comes in the middle of the battlefield, and then the camera stays over there. So there are a number of names described over there, and those names both have historical and philosophical significance. Historically, each of these is a very important character, as a warrior of significant prowess, and they have been referred to in the story before. But that's not so much relevant. But now, from the philosophical significance, the importance comes not so much from the names, the specific names that are spoken, but the specific name that is missed out. Blindness is about, as I said, the unwillingness to see. So Duryodhan describes the armies on both sides, but he leaves out Krishna. And why does he leave out Krishna? It's not that Krishna is not visible to him. He mentions Arjuna right in the beginning. In the very first verse that he describes, Bhima Arjuna Samayudhi, like Bhima and Arjuna. So Arjuna is in front of him, and Arjuna is visible on Arjuna's chariot. In a prominently visible place in front of Arjuna is the charioteer. The charioteer is Krishna. So we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as it matters to us. And in the battlefield, he thinks that Krishna doesn't matter. And why does Krishna not matter? Because Krishna is a non-combatant. Krishna has taken a vow that I will not fight. And therefore he thinks, when we are comparing military strength, what is the value of even mentioning someone who is not going to fight? Now, this is a basic mistake in strategy, that any confrontation, whether it be a war, whether it be sports, it's not just a physical game, it's also a mental game. So, and at the level of mental game, the person who is strategizing is also very important. So that inability to see Krishna, it's actually not inability, it is unwillingness, but it's not that he can't see Krishna with his eyes. He just doesn't acknowledge the importance of Krishna. And that kind of unwillingness is not just a strategic mistake, it's a strategically catastrophic mistake. The subsequent war, Krishna will play not just vital but decisive roles in bringing about the downfall of every one of the key leaders on Duryodhana's side. But from the Gita's perspective, it is also a sign of a spiritual mistake. In terms of his spiritual awareness, he does not acknowledge the importance of the divine or even the presence of the divine over there. In life, we are constantly confronted by the visible world. The visible world is active, attractive, and even addictive, especially nowadays with the media using sophisticated psychological insights to make temptations as alluring as possible. Now, the economy itself is nowadays called as the attention economy. That advertisers seek the attention of potential consumers. If they get the attention, they get the consumer thereafter. So the visible world is active, attractive, even addictive. And spiritual growth essentially requires the capacity to recognize the value of what is not visible. In fact, this is not just a matter of spiritual growth, it is also any kind of intellectual growth. If we are right now using the Zoom technology, nobody can see electronic magnetic waves. But those electromagnetic waves are what are enabling us to have this communication. So we may not even think about those waves, but there are scientists, there are technologists who are very aware of those things, and they are able to tap those things for our utilization. The point is, when we evolve, when we grow, whether it is intellectually or spiritually, we learn to recognize that there is more than what meets the eye, or we could say there's more than what strikes the eye. And often what doesn't strike the eye is actually much more important. So now Krishna is not invisible to Duryodhana, but Krishna is not a prominent presence in Duryodhana's eyes. So that devaluing that which we don't think is important, that can be a pitfall and even the cause of downfall. So that is Duryodhana's blindness. And the first 10 verses describe Duryodhana's blindness. He describes various warriors, mentions them by name, but doesn't mention Krishna at all. Now, so this is the second level of blindness. And then we will have the third level, which is Arjuna also goes blind in the sense that he becomes confused. What am I to do? When sometimes, say, somebody is walking along a road and suddenly there is a thick fog, it's not that they are blind, but they are blinded because they can't see. Sometimes in a wrestling match, if somebody is unethical, they may just throw sand into the opponent's eyes. So Arjuna gets blinded. And how he gets blinded is described in the subsequent verses. So anything you want to comment? Or should I ask you, or should I just keep speaking?
Yeah, just keep speaking. I'm just like enthralled. I love your systematic approach to things. It's just so clear and beautiful.
Okay, thank you. So then the narrative camera shifts to the other side. And when it shifts to the other side, it focuses on first Krishna and Arjuna. This is the indication also of how Sanjay, the narrator, does not share the values of the person to whom it is being narrated or the son of that person, Dhritarashtra or Duryodhana. Sanjay could have gone and focused his narration by starting with any one of the warriors of the Pandava side. He starts with Krishna and Arjuna. And Krishna's entry itself is quite disarming. He is the divine, he is God, but he is playing the role of a charioteer over there. Now, while there is again a historical significance to this, that Arjuna sought Krishna on his side and Duryodhana sought Krishna's army, the philosophical significance is that the Gita also has resonance with our lives. Frequently in the Upanishads, in the philosophical texts in the Vedic tradition, the body is compared to a chariot, and the Lord is present inside the body. So he is the person who actually operates the body. So right now I am speaking, and I may say that thing that I am speaking. Of course, there is truth at one level. I think my camera went.
Yeah, it froze. Your camera froze. Your audio still seems clear. Just fell off. I think. Oh, there he is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you. Can't see you, but can hear you. Oh,
I'm
there you
there.
are. See you now.
Okay. So Krishna is like the charioteer of our body also. He is the person who is actually making our body function. Right now, when I want to speak, I have no idea of the mechanisms by which my thoughts get converted into sounds and come out as clearly articulated words. There is a sophisticated mechanism which I just use. Now, how does that all mechanism work? So that is actually the super soul who is the charioteer. Super soul is God himself in our heart. He is the charioteer of the body. Now, Krishna and Arjuna both blow their conches, and in one sense, the narrative is going in a particular direction. That direction is that how everything is on the side of the Pandavas. That Duryodhana is shaken by seeing the strength of their military formations. Duryodhana has slips of tongue. That's in one particular verse in 1.10 where he says that, oh, actually the opposite army is immeasurable. Then when the Pandavas blow their conches, then it is described at the opposite side. Their hearts are shattered. Hridayani Vyadarayat. So all the directions seem to be that the Pandavas are on the upper side. So the things are rising for them. The fortune is on their side. And in sports, sometimes it's against the run of the play. The way the momentum is going, suddenly things start going down. So it's almost completely unexpected what happens to Arjuna thereafter. So Arjuna is ready to fight, but then suddenly he says to Krishna, please take my army in between, take my chariot between the two armies. And he says, I want to see who is it that is supporting the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra. Now, this is a curious request. It's a curious request that could have made everyone on his side furious. What is there to see right now? It is not that there are some new generals who have joined the opposite side. The alignments have been formed months ago. This war is not like a surprise ambush attack. In those times, war was more like sports. It was like in a particular stadium, a match occurs, and both sides want to win. But in a sports match, it is a test of skill and strength. Who will be better? So war was like that. And it is not that some new members are going to be suddenly recruited or inducted in the team on the opposite side. So in one sense, there was nothing for Arjuna to see. He already knew who was there on the opposite side. So why does he get this desire? This is where the ethical dilemma that Arjuna is going to be afflicted by soon is being pointed to. That actually this is a fratricidal war. They are cousins. In India, often the word brother or sister is used for members of one's extended family also. So that means somebody might be a cousin, but they say this person is my brother, this person is my sister. And then there is a phrase in India which translates into English in a particular way. Right? Okay, is he your real brother? Is he a real sister? Like, I have a brother who is based in America in Detroit, and we look very dissimilar. So I was in Detroit. So at that time, one Indian friend asked me, one Indian devotee asked me, "Is he your real brother?" There's one American devotee, also new person over there. He just said, "Hey, you Indians, do you have imaginary brothers also? What do you mean by a real brother?" So the idea is that the Pandavas and the Kauravas, they are cousins. In the broader Indian context, they are like brothers. And that's why this war is considered to be like a fratricidal war. And it is very painful. The Pandavas have been trying to avoid this as much as they could. And there is a part of Arjuna that is still hoping that maybe the war can be avoided. Or if it can't be avoided, at least its impact can be minimized. So, what he wants to see is how bent are the people on the opposite side to fight the war? How much are they uh, determined to fight? In the Mahabharata, there is a very beautiful metaphor given. Duryodhan is considered to be the tree of evil. And the root of that tree is his father Dhritarashtra. The stem of the tree is the key warrior on Duryodhan's side, Karna. The main branch is the strategist Shakuni. And the blossoming flower on that tree of evil is Duryodhan's younger brother, Dushasan. So basically, these are the evil core, and they are bent on fighting. That everyone knows, even Arjuna knows. His concern is how much is everyone else supporting them? How much is everyone else bent on fighting? It came as a great shock to the Pandavas that actually the Kauravas were able to get so many people to support their side. It is not that everybody who was supporting the Kauravas were themselves evil people. They either were obligated because of some reasons, or they were manipulated, they were tricked, they were fed a particular narrative, and that's how they went on the side of the Kauravas. If you look at the backstory, if you look at the full story, the Pandavas are undoubtedly virtuous. The Kauravas are vicious. And the Kauravas had tried to dishonor and disrobe the Pandavas' wife Draupadi. If when somebody has done something like that in a public assembly, there are always people who have evil intentions, and they will force themselves on weak, vulnerable people, especially women. But most people would do something like this in some dark alley where there'll be no eyewitnesses. Generally, even criminals have fear of the law. If somebody tries to violate a woman in public, that means they have no fear of the law. If somebody tries to do something like this in a police station or in a court, then that means not only do they have no fear of the law, the law has fear of them. And this was the brazen level of misdeed that the Kauravas had done. Now, who would want to support them after they had done something like this? And how come that more kings supported such a person rather than the Pandavas? So this itself indicates the power of narratives, the power of propaganda. The Pandavas were in a forest for a long time. 12 years in the forest and 1 year they had to be in incognito exile. So during that time, they had no contact with the who's who of the world. They had no contact with the various kings. And during that time, Duryodhan was winning over all these people. He was telling not just his own side of the story, he was giving his spin to the whole story. And that's how the opposite side had got so many followers. So a
We
part of
talked.
Arjuna was.
We
Sorry, go
actually
ahead.
talked. We actually talked about this point. How the Kauravas had 11 divisions and the Pandavas had 7 divisions. And
Yes.
I think when we talked about this, we talked about how when you and I talked about this, we talked about how human nature is that of like not always standing up for what you believe in necessarily and just going with the majority
Yes,
and
that is
like
true.
that. Yeah.
That is true. It's event. So many people just went on their side because they didn't want to antagonize Duryodhan, but many were actually misled by him.
Hmm.
They were fed the propaganda and they bought into it. So a part of Arjuna was still hoping that maybe even if Duryodhan is bent on fighting, the others may not be. And maybe even if this fight occurs, it may not be as brutal as we fear it might be. Maybe it might end it soon. Might end it soon. But when he comes in the middle, that time he sees that everybody is bent on fighting. The opposite side have more or less cast aside affection or sense of right or wrong, or even any sense of the possibility of reconciliation. And that is when the gravity of what is about to happen actually hits him. It becomes real for him. And then he becomes overwhelmed. So he sees Bhishma and Drona on the opposite side. He says, how can I fight against these two people? My grandfather, who was my first martial teacher, and Drona, who was my formal martial teacher. How can I fight against them? Even for a warrior, this is the worst nightmare come true. The people for whose pleasure he learned archery, now he had to fight against them. And then he saw that it was going to be a dynastic destruction. The entire Kaurava dynasty, spanning several generations, was assembled on the two sides. And that's when he started not just flinching, but flailing and falling. How can I fight? Is the war worth it? So he got torn between two senses of duty. One is his warrior's duty, where he has to fight no matter who the opponent is, and the other is his dynastic duty, where he felt that these are people of my own dynasty. Is any kingdom worth really destroy the destruction of my own dynasty, of my own people? And there was his dilemma. And there could be specific further reasons as analyzed, but overall, the Gita begins with an ethical dilemma out of which there is no way out that Arjuna sees. And as he starts thinking about the consequences, he starts feeling that I am motivated by greed for a kingdom. And even if the others are similarly motivated, I don't want to stoop to their level. So therefore, I will not fight. He starts foreseeing or visualizing or imagining what would happen if the dynasty would be destroyed. How generations of people will suffer, especially those who are vulnerable and need protection. Women and children, they would suffer. This cost is just too much. And therefore he feels, I will not fight. And he puts aside his bow. So Arjuna is blinded by the ethical complexity of the situation. Arjuna does not simply get an attack of nerves. He's not scared. Oh, what will happen to me? Will I die in this fight? Not once does he mention fear of his own death. He is torn. Now, on one side, Arjuna makes a strong case that I should not fight. But in the second chapter, what happens is he recognizes that not fighting is also not a good option. Why? Because even if he chooses not to fight, it's unlikely that the war will stop. Because the opposite side will keep attacking. And even if he chooses not to fight, he is unlikely to be able to persuade even his own brothers to stop fighting. Even if he makes Yudhishthir see sense, makes Yudhishthir listen, Bhima is not going to listen. And without him, the war will actually become bloodier. The war will go on longer. The war will take a greater toll, at least on his side, maybe on the opposite side also. So that's why not fighting is also not an option for him. So so I'll conclude with the last point. I'm going to the second chapter also over here. See, there is hesitation to fight at the end of the first chapter, at 146, where Arjuna puts aside his bow, saying, I can't fight. No, Yotsya, I can't fight. But that is slightly different from what happens in 2.7. In 2.7, when Krishna is addressed by Arjuna, that is more in the mood of a student. He says, initially his mood is, I don't think fighting is the right thing to do, so I will not fight. But in 2.7, it is, I don't know what is the right thing to do. So please tell me. You tell me what is the right thing to do. And that is when the Bhagavad Gita will begin.
And that's the pivotal
So
verse that we've talked about.
Krishna gives some conventional wisdom. Krishna says, no, why are you becoming weak-minded like this? You will be treated as a coward. Sorry?
Oh, no, sorry. I was just saying that's the pivotal verse that we've talked about that a bit. I think we have like one verse until it comes, but when when Arjuna just completely surrenders, like, tell me what to do. I'm bewildered and confused. Please instruct me. So it's that verse is coming that you just talked about. I was just making the connection.
Okay, excellent. So Krishna initially says that you will be treated, you will gain infamy, you will be seen as a coward. Arjuna retorts with indignation. He says, I am not being cowardly. I am not being spineless. I am being thoughtful. And he challenges Krishna, would it be easy for you to fight if your guru and grandfather were on the opposite side? So there is that exchange between Krishna and Arjuna. But Arjuna realizes that no matter how indignant he might be, his indignation is not removing his confusion. And that is when he surrenders. So that's a broad summary.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. You know what's impressive about CC? He can come on and you can ask him to speak about anything and he can just do it. He doesn't have to prepare. You just like could show up and he can give a class on anything. It's like incredibly impressive. So thank you. I do have a couple questions for you, and then maybe we can open it up to our live audience here if they have any questions. My first question is, you talked about the 3 different blindnesses that we see in this first chapter. Which one do you think, or all of them, and how do you think we can relate to these blindnesses in our own lives?
Okay. So you could say that, these three blindnesses, thank you for raising this question. They are three different degrees. One is like a circumstantial blindness. That is Arjuna's blindness. Right? He is in a circumstance where it is very difficult for him to figure out what to do. And we all may be put in such a blindness. We need guidance at that time to come out of that blindness. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Was I audible to you?
Yeah, you're audible. I think there's a lag, but that's okay. You're definitely audible.
Okay. So the Gita's wisdom is what is meant to address this circumstantial kind of blindness. Now, apart from that, we also have, so we all might go into difficult situations. And if we turn to the Gita, or we have friends who are aware of the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, they can help us to face difficult circumstances in life, which may otherwise blind us. Then the second is Dhritarashtra's blindness is more the blindness of conditionings. Now you could call it more of a conditional blindness. Conditional means that the word conditional can be an adjective for condition and for conditioning. I'm using it for the word conditioning. So the blindness that comes from conditioning. His conditioning was that he was very attached to his son, Duryodhana. In one sense, while both of them are evil, but Dhritarashtra is more like a passive villain, and Duryodhana is more like an active villain. So it's sometimes some people are themselves bad, and others are attached to those who are bad. So they may themselves not do bad things on their own, but because they're attached to those who are bad, they end up supporting bad deeds. They may even end up doing some bad deeds. So Dhritarashtra's blindness takes a long time to go. So sometimes if we are too attached to or too influenced by, too indoctrinated by, too brainwashed by someone, if we are too, if we are in an unhealthy relationship where that person, the other person becomes our pathway for linking with the whole world, and we see everyone through that person only. We connect with everyone through that person. Often that's a sign of abusive relationship, where that person has so much control that we can't relate with anyone without the sanction, without the medium of that person. So Dhritarashtra, he gets wisdom, but not by the hearing of the Bhagavad Gita. He gets wisdom only when this abusive relationship ends. Only when Duryodhan is killed, and slowly after that, his attachment for Duryodhan weakens. Then later on, Vidura, who is Dhritarashtra's brother and friend, will come and enlighten him many years later. So if the blindness has come from circumstances, then if in those circumstances someone who has wisdom comes and guides us, that person can help us. But if the blindness has come from conditionings, then those conditionings have to be either destroyed by externals or they have to be relinquished internally. Then only the vision will be restored. The Duryodhan, on the other hand, he is the active villain. So we could say his blindness is intentional or calculational. Calculational means one who knows what the person is, what I'm doing, and they do it deliberately. So, like sometimes I may do a bad thing because I don't want to displease you, and you are doing the bad thing. But I want to do the bad thing. So that is Duryodhan's situation. And for his blindness, there is no cure through wisdom. Sometimes some people say that all problems can be solved through discussion and mediation? Well, not necessarily. Mhm. Sometimes there has to be a protective use of force. We don't want to use force in the mood of revengefulness, but in the sense of protection, sometimes some people just have to learn the hard way. They have to be taught the hard way. So in the Vedic tradition, there are two words: there is Shastra and there is Shastra. Shastra is weapons, and Shastra is wisdom texts. So some people learn through Shastra, but some people have to be taught through Shastra only. So Duryodhan learns through weapons. He has to learn in the school of hard knocks. He has to be defeated and destroyed. He never gives up his blindness till the end. So hopefully, none of our us have a blindness that is that deep rooted. But by the wisdom of the Gita and by associating with those who share and embody that wisdom, we can become free from whatever blindness may be afflicting us at our level.
Wow, that was a beautiful answer. And it's actually a good segue into my next question is, and we've actually, this question has come up during our podcast, and I did my best to give it justice, but let's see what your response is. Sometimes I know for me, when I first came in and started learning about the Gita, the fact that the setting is a war seems like very contradictory to like the message that it's trying to give of, if we're like looking for like love and light, and then there's this war, how do we kind of rationalize that in our minds, what's going on? Like why is that the setting, and how do we kind of reconcile that?
Yeah. So the thing is, that is a concerning issue over there. But first of all, we can look at the content itself. That the Gita doesn't have any hate speech. The Gita does not even make any references to the specifics of the reason for the war. So, although the war, Gita is spoken on the battlefield, and after the speaking of the Gita, the war does occur. Arjuna does fight. But Krishna does not induce Arjuna to fight by triggering him to anger or hate. In fact, Krishna studiously and scrupulously avoids anything that will inflame Arjuna's emotions. Arjuna is a competent and fierce warrior. If Krishna had just reminded Arjuna of how his brother, how his wife had been treated, that alone would have been enough for Arjuna to have wanted to fight. Remember how they dishonored you, how they tried to disrobe your wife. Remember her tears and her looks of anger and remonstration as you watched on helplessly. Remember how much rage you.
Oh, you just became inaudible. You said, remember how much rage, and then we couldn't hear you anymore.
Yeah. Remember how much rage you had felt at that time. Remember how helpless you felt to punish those who were doing such a great wrong to your wife. Just evoking that memory would have caused Arjuna's blood to boil, and Krishna could have got Arjuna to fight. That Krishna does not do that throughout the Gita indicates that the Gita itself is not meant to incite violence. So that's the first point from the content of the Gita. Now we could go to the bigger story of the Mahabharata and see how the Pandavas tried everything. I mean, Krishna himself tried everything. Krishna went as a peace messenger. That is no small thing. Now, a huge, long war is going on between Russia and Ukraine. Say the president of Ukraine goes to Russia, or the president of Russia goes to Ukraine to seek peace. The top person goes. Then that indicates that the attempt for peace is in dead earnest. So Krishna himself going uh, shows how much they tried for peace. And what had Duryodhan done? So imagine if Zelensky goes to Russia or Putin goes to Ukraine, and where they are going, they try to arrest that person. Just uproar with the war will become far more severe. That's what Duryodhan tried to do to Krishna. And in spite of that, there is a measured philosophical discussion. So neither is Krishna inciting anger in Arjuna, nor is Krishna himself being angry, in the sense that Krishna is not saying, you try to humiliate and arrest me, now I will have you punished. So neither of those are happening over here. So you could look at the context and the content of the Gita. Now we may say, okay, why have the battlefield setting at all? The idea is that philosophy is often seen as abstract or irrelevant. Can you hear me, or you lost me again?
No, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. So the idea is that the Gita uses the battlefield setting because it wants to drive home the importance and even the indispensability of philosophy in making life's decisions. People think that, okay, philosophy is something which I'll read when I have some time in my life in future. Right now I'm busy, I have hundreds of things to do now. But actually, somebody may want to be a go-getter. That's good. But where to go and what to get, that has to be decided. What is the worthwhile thing to get in our life? What is the worthwhile direction to go in our life? That needs to be learned if one is to be truly a successful go-getter. And the Gita is going to teach that. So the battlefield, now, few situations in real life demand as urgent action as does a battlefield when a war is imminent on the battlefield. So that the Gita is spoken on such a setting indicates that no matter how pressing or urgent our situation might be, still philosophy can be relevant for us. And we should be looking for philosophy for guidance. Okay. Does that
That's
answer
a
your
beautiful
question?
point. Yeah, that's a beautiful point. Thank you. With the last couple minutes we have here, I would like to see if anybody else has any
Sorry, can you hear me?
questions.
I can't hear you.
Yes, I can hear you. Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Cece? Cece? Can you hear me? Hmm. If anybody does have any questions, do you want to put your hand up? Anybody? Is anything that they'd like to ask Cece? If not, then oh, Lisa. Lisa has a question. Great. Cece, can you hear me? Cece? Can you hear? Can you put a thumbs up if you can hear me? He's having some technical difficulties. I can't hear you at all.
Now,
Oh, there you go. You came back.
what about now?
Yes, now I can hear. Can you
Can
hear
you
me
hear me?
now? Yeah.
So
Can you hear
sorry about
me?
this. Yeah. Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Lisa has a question.
Sure.
I want to
So,
thank you for your generosity to be with us today and to share about the Gita and your wisdom and knowledge. Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to meet you. My question this morning was about the Gita, and you were saying that it was written in levels. So we have the outer level,
to
And then I'm not sure if I understood the second level or the next level. So could you please expound?
Yeah. Um, I'm sorry, I
Radha, you
didn't
may
hear the
have to
question.
help.
I was trying to look down.
Aw.
Did you get the question, Cece?
No, not really.
Oh, looks like he's trying to fix his connection.
Mhm.
Let's try now. Can you hear me now? Sorry about this.
Yes, we can hear
You
you.
can. Okay. Yes. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, and in the beginning, you mentioned that the Gita was written in levels. And you said the first level was the outer level. And then I was wondering if you could expound a little more on the next levels.
I talked about 3 levels of blindness. I don't think I talked about any other levels in this session. Okay, Gita, can we understand different levels? Okay, sorry. There are 2 different conversations I mentioned. Dhritarashtra and Sanjay in a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, his second chapter. And then it is also ultimately meant to be a conversation between us and the divinity within us. Like
Yes.
the body is like a chariot and Krishna is there in our body chariot. So it's a conversation between us at an internal level also. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So the more we study the Gita and understand it, then we will be able to have this conversation better. I'm just trying to connect from some other way. But
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah,
Are there any other
Hare
questions
Krishna.
before we adjourn for the day? Okay, yeah, I can say I so appreciate you coming and being here and sharing your wisdom with us. It's so nice to hear this summary review after spending over a month really studying the first chapter together. You really just kind of brought it all together for us, and so really appreciate that, and hope that you'll come back and do some more chapter summary reviews for us because it's very
I'll be
enlightening.
happy to come. Thank you. Now, just a quick question over there about how we can tune to Krishna's voice. I think 2 things over there. First is when we read the Gita or when we hear the Gita, at that time, if there is anything which speaks to us especially, then we treasure that, we value that. We make sure that we cherish it in our heart. So wherever some message of Krishna resonates with us, we should that application. So
Oh,
when
probably
we
your connection
try
is
to
not connection is not good, and I feel like you're just speaking nectar here. I'd love to hear it, but it's
okay, so I'll do one thing. I'll send an audio answer separately then later. Okay.
okay.
Sorry
Okay,
about
thank you.
this.
You can
Thank you so
send them
much.
directly on the
Hare Krishna.
Seeker's Quest thread. Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Hare
Thank you. Okay, thank you
Uh,
all for coming. I hope that
Thank you so much for arranging that, Radha.
you.
Thank you so much.
yeah.